You know that idea that the Big Ten and the SEC could form a super league? I have a couple of hurdles that I don't know how they get past.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. We'll check in Blacksburg with the Hokies of Virginia Tech and a playoff team, or a playoff potential team, with a special guest, all coming up on today's show. But start with this concept of a super league. It's been tossed around, it's been discussed, and there are a couple hurdles that I haven't really seen an explanation as to how the Big Ten and SEC would get over them. Number one, most importantly, they'd have to kick teams out of their leagues. Now, we all know who those teams would probably be. In the SEC, you'd probably do away with Vanderbilt. You might toss Mississippi State to the side. You can go up and down the list and say, don't really need them. Don't need that school, don't need this school. But right now, it's more likely that the SEC expands, that it grows, than it detracts. But legally speaking, can you kick teams out of a league? The former Pac-12 schools did not kick Oregon State and Washington State out of the league. They're still in the league. They still are the Pac-12. You go check the win totals over at FanDuel, it's 7.5 for both of them. Under the Pac-12 label, they're still in the Pac-12. Leaving the conference and leaving them behind, that is different because they're going to another league. They're not going to form their own league. We haven't seen that happen before. So it would be something completely unique, completely unprecedented. USC and UCLA leaving the Pac-12, which ended up blowing up the league. That's not unprecedented. The Southwest Conference used to exist. We've seen teams jump from the Mountain West to bigger conferences before. We've seen teams move from, take Texas A&M, for instance, or Missouri, or Nebraska. Some notable realignment chess pieces that have moved over the years. Those sorts of moves have always taken place. We haven't seen schools literally get kicked out of the league. Determined you're dead weight. Like, would Alabama ever decide, this is just hypothetical, of course, don't anybody overreact, but would they ever decide, we don't want to play against Auburn anymore. We're done. We just want to play against Georgia, and we'll bring Tennessee along for the ride, but we don't need the Vanderbilts, or we don't need Ole Miss, or we need all this. Let's just go get the best teams from the Big Ten. Is that legally possible? Because I am unaware of an instance in which that has actually happened, in which a team has been kicked out of the league. Because that's what it would be. If you form those two leagues, you'd kick everybody else out and they'd be scrambling for new homes. And that is different than the realignment moves that have taken place. So that's the first hurdle that I don't know how they clear. Maybe they could find a way. That seems like it'd be a little bit difficult because of the second point that I want to raise. The media rights contracts are locked in through 2030. We still don't know if you can get out of one of those. If you can say, nah, this doesn't apply to me anymore. So far, they've been ironclad. The ACC is going to be a test case of that. Because last time I checked, Florida State and Clemson are still trying to sue, and North Carolina is poking around, or at least making some noise. They're chattering. They're on people's radar as a possible expansion candidate. As I've said many times and shall repeat for those who have not heard me say it before, the key to the ACC's survival post FSU and Clemson is North Carolina. You keep North Carolina, you keep NC State, you keep Duke, and you keep the entire state, which is not an insignificant media market to have as a part of your media rights contract. But they just signed these big deals, the Big Ten and the SEC. I don't doubt that one day in college football, you could have an NFL-style AFC versus NFC, and you could, have a way more teams in it than the AFC and NFC, and you could do something like section them up into, divisions or conferences, and you can make those regionally based, and then you could formulate a playoff structure from there. Yeah, that could absolutely happen one day. But I don't know how the television contracts that just entered into agreement with all of these leagues would say 4 or 5 years before those contracts are up, which, by the way, haven't even really started yet. Have you even heard a game yet? This is a rhetorical question. With the iconic SEC on CBS music, also RIP, is pertaining to Big Ten football. Have you seen that yet? That hasn't even happened. So we still got to wait for these things to play out, see how they go. How do the numbers do? What do the mediums look like for broadcasting? Because you have games that are on Peacock. You have games that are on this streamer, or that streamer, this cable channel, or that cable channel. And the playoff games is having certain first-round games subleased to Turner from ESPN, who have all the media rights. There are just too many complications. There are too many complications for me to say that sort of solution, sure, it's worth discussing, because it could happen one day. I don't know how, with those two obstacles, it takes place in the here and now. And you can debate, and I'm sure people will in the comment section, from now until the cows come home, whatever that expression actually means. I didn't grow up on a farm, in case that wasn't obvious. Which teams would get left behind? Certainly Vanderbilt's the easy one that comes to mind. And maybe Mississippi State. But would Ole Miss be in there? Would Auburn be in there? I don't know. And by the way, who's making that decision? Because remember, all these schools have worked together for a mighty long time. Are they going to just kick them out? Leave them on the curb? Say, we don't want you anymore. We don't need you. We don't want you, Missouri. We don't want you, Arkansas. They're just going to do that? Because they just made a move to add to their conference. They are going to ponder Florida State and Clemson and those sorts of moves. I don't see a super league on the horizon. I don't want to see a super league. I would like for conferences to remain in place. Full disclosure, I am not rooting for Florida State and Clemson to get out of the ACC. I hope they have to stay. And Florida State and Clemson fans might not like me saying that, but that's what I'm rooting for to have happen, because I'm a sucker for nostalgia and consistency and tradition and regionality and conferences and whatnot. I don't like the realignment moves that have taken place. I don't want it to continue just because it has before. Now, I fully understand why Florida State and Clemson feel like they need to put themselves in that position and find an opportunity to seek greener pastures than being in the ACC. But would I rather they stay there? Yeah, I would. And I don't think it would be all terrible or all bad for them. Your access to the playoff would be incredible. If you're Florida State, think about this. If you're Florida State playing in the ACC with Clemson and Miami and NC State, North Carolina, and everybody else that's there, and we're going to talk about another one of those teams in Virginia Tech here in just a moment. If you're looking at that future, you have a better path to the playoff than many teams in the SEC. They're going to eat each other alive. They got Texas and Oklahoma in there. We know what Oklahoma is when they're run right. They're a perennial playoff team, conference title contender. We haven't seen that in the SEC. But what's to say they can't do it? Do they not recruit at a high level? No, they do. Do they have a good coach? Seems like it. Can they bring in good players? Well, this year will be an interesting test case, to be sure. But I was thinking about that Super League and thought, you know what? I don't see that as being on the horizon. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlinCFB. We're going to Blacksburg next, Blacksburg, Virginia, to talk about this question. What do you expect to get from Virginia Tech this season? This episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier, which is better than harder, of course. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down, which is better than up, the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals. So just ask yourself this question. What are you waiting for? I don't know either. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, Create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Did you notice what happened in Blacksburg recently? It didn't take place specifically in Blacksburg per se, but Virginia Tech, after the spring transfer portal window and the dust kind of settled, had their win total tick up by a game. It's 8.5. 8.5. Miami's is 9.5. Clemson's is 9.5. Florida State's is 9.5. And there's Virginia Tech with a win total of 8.5, same as NC State last time I checked, according to our friends at FanDuel. So, what do you expect to get from Virginia Tech? What should you expect? I think Virginia Tech is the difference between expectations and hopes. Can you expect to go over if you're Virginia Tech? It's year 3 for Brent Pry. Year 1, a rebuild. Last year, by all accounts, a successful season. And over the second half of the year, Virginia Tech was a very different football team, really the second 2/3 of the season. Virginia Tech finished with a 7-6 record last year. They closed with a bowl game victory over a Tulane team that admittedly was undergoing a coaching change, but was still pretty darn good, had played in the American Conference Championship game, and Virginia Tech wins that to end the year 7-6. What do you think their record was through the first 4 weeks of the season? It was 1-3. They were a 1-3 football team, and they ended up 7-6. Now, I'm not a math expert, but I believe that means over their final 9 games, they went 6-3. And Virginia Tech fans, I think, are hopeful, are optimistic that they can carry that sort of play that they put on display over the final 9 games into this season. They are one of the leaders in the country in the low to mid 80s in returning production. That is not a small thing, especially in today's world of college football. Virginia Tech, you look at their transfer portal class, it's pretty small. 7 guys. It's a top 50 class, but it's nothing special. You know why? Because they don't feel like they have to. That's my suspicion, is they didn't go out and hit the transfer portal incredibly hard because they looked at the roster and said, well, we could plug a piece here or there, but we're good. We got people coming back. We got a coaching staff coming back. They should feel pretty confident. They should feel confident that they can improve and be better than a 6-6 regular season football team. I mean, you look at the losses they had a year ago. They scored under 20 points in 3 consecutive games, and they lost to Purdue, who went 4-8, Rutgers 6-6, and Marshall, which was not a Power 5 football team. That was a bad stretch of football. Things looked like they were down and out. And you got to give Brent Pry and his staff a lot of credit, because you have to instill a certain sort of culture of belief in a place that hasn't seen a 10-win season since 2016. And 16-17 are the last times they finished the season ranked inside the top 25. To start 1-3 with those losses, those are not high-profile losses. You're not going out there losing to Clemson, Florida State, and whatnot. They lost to Louisville and Florida State later in the season. The Louisville game was particularly a tough one, shall we say. The final score was 34-3, but they were in the midst of the rebuild. So they're about a next step. They're about taking that next step. At a place like Virginia Tech, can you expect it? I think Virginia Tech and Miami are different. I think Miami expects to take a big step forward. I think Virginia Tech should aspire, should hope to take a next step forward. If Virginia Tech goes, let's say, 7-5 this year, and they only improve by 1 game, is that a successful season? If you're a Virginia Tech fan, would you take 7-5 right now? Based on the ones that pop into my YouTube comments when I talk about the Hokies, the answer to that question is probably no. You wouldn't take 7-5. And I don't have a problem with you having high aspirations here. The difference between Virginia Tech right now and Miami is the expectations of Miami are higher. There's an expectation Miami's got to win at least 8 games this year. Probably 9. They should win 9 games. 9 or 10 games should be where Miami's win total is at. And if Virginia Tech were to win 9 or 10 games, it'd be a smashing success, and Brent Pry would likely get a contract extension. But if Miami wins 9 or 10 games, there's no contract extension. There's no, oh my gosh, can't believe you did this. It's, well, that's kind of what we're paying you to do here, Mario. The last couple of years, we've had to endure a little bit of toughness, and we're not firing you if you don't get to the playoff or the ACC Championship game, but boy, you should get there eventually with the way you're recruiting. So the Virginia Tech schedule this year goes something like this. Vegas is pretty confident in the Hokies. You do not see a win total tick up by one full win very often. Now, FanDuel sticks with half win totals, of course, because that's the most logical way to do it. But still, you got to do something to make Vegas feel, no, this isn't right. Now, maybe there's a lot of public money coming in on over 7.5, and everybody's hammering Virginia Tech. Maybe it's more a publicly moved line than a betting line move. But they start out at Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt's not going to be a great team this year. It's Vanderbilt. You know, if they win 4 or 5 games, that'd be a good season for Clark Lee and company. But on the road, week 1, Virginia Tech's a 13.5 point favorite. Now, that's telling. That number is telling. Spencer, Vanderbilt's not any good. Yeah, I know. I just said that. Allow me to explain. Vanderbilt is a team that if you are capable of being towards the upper tier of your conference, you are about a 2 touchdown road favorite. That's a big number on the road. That's not in Blacksburg. That game's in Nashville. They got to go on the road week 1, and they're a 2 touchdown favorite. Then they come back home and they'll look for revenge against Marshall. Not something Hokie fans would like me to be able to say, but that's the reality of the situation. Then they play at Old Dominion, and I tell you what, if there was ever a program that just seemed to pull upsets more than they should, but then not really do anything with it, it'd be Old Dominion. Like, Old Dominion's not Boise State. They don't have a Fiesta Bowl win, or, you know, Tulane in the Cotton Bowl a couple of years ago, or Memphis getting to the Cotton Bowl years ago against Penn State. Pretty sure they lost that one. They don't have a season like that. But every now and then, like every other year in college football, don't you feel like you look up and Old Dominion has beaten a team that makes you go, they beat who? They did what? What happened here? Virginia Tech plays them on the road, just saying. This is a very, very road-heavy schedule early for Virginia Tech. I don't love that element of it. They come back home against Rutgers. Probably not going to be a bad football team. Might not be a great one, but shouldn't be a bad football team. Then they go at Miami. Then they go at Stanford. Okay, that's 4 of your first 6 games on the road. Enter Sandman is only going to be played twice as of October 5th. Twice! That's it. That's a tragedy. That's a tragedy. Until you look at the second half of their schedule. If they can fight their way through those first 6 games and find a way to just go 4-2, maybe you drop that game at Miami and you fall one other time, I think you'd be in a really good spot. Boston College, Georgia Tech at home, at Syracuse, first-year head coach, new quarterback in Kyle McCord. Host Clemson. That could be a showdown. That could be one heck of a showdown. At Duke and host Virginia. It's a pretty manageable schedule. All things considered, it's a fairly manageable schedule. I look at Virginia Tech, and I think the potential for them to win 9 or 10 games is absolutely there. They've got to manage. They cannot lose more than 2 games in their first 6. But if they come out of their first 6 at 5-1, I might be aboard the hype train, and you might have to realize, whoever you are listening to or watching this show, that Virginia Tech has a path to reach the ACC Championship game. Florida State's not on the schedule. That's kind of a break because, well, Florida State's preseason conference favorite. But who is on the schedule? Miami and Clemson, other ACC title contenders. You don't have NC State on this schedule, so you don't have to play that team. But you have an opportunity to get a head-to-head advantage with one of those teams who are going to be vying for a spot in the ACC title game. So, yes, it is absolutely doable. It is possible. And I'm optimistic about what Virginia Tech can do this year. Do I expect them to? Not necessarily. But can they? Can they do it? Yes. Yes, they can. Tulane can also make the playoffs, speaking of Virginia Tech, who they beat in their bowl game last year. We're going to talk about what that would look like coming up next. Far be it from me to ever let you all forget that a group of 5 team is making the playoff. Tulane could very well be one of those teams. Thrilled to be joined by Corey Gloor, the radio voice of the Green Wave, fresh off a run to the NCAA Regionals in baseball. It's all eyes on football right now, Corey, with Jon Sumrall coming in from Troy. Let's start with the new head coach. You've been there the last several years. What are your impressions of the Green Wave's new head man?
Well, and thanks for having me back on here, Spencer. It's been a little bit, so I'm glad to be back on here talking Tulane with you. He's done an awesome job of, I think, maintaining the excitement for fans here of Tulane. There was a strong amount of sadness when Willie Fritz left for Houston with what he built here, but to get a guy like Jon Sumrall in, it really has kept the momentum going. He's really captured the fan base and kind of brought them under his wing. And so it really hasn't felt as though it's missed a beat with switching from Willie Fritz to Jon Sumrall. We'll see schematically how things are going to change here with what he brings over from Troy and everything like that. But in terms of just the excitement surrounding the program, that has continued to elevate even through this coaching change. I'm not sure, ball not even kicked off yet, that Tulane could have found a better replacement for Willie Fritz just with the types of jobs that Jon Sumrall was in the mix for when he was at Troy and what he did with Troy. And to get him here at Tulane, it shows that there is a real strong chance that Tulane's competing for that group of 5 playoff spot that you just mentioned, and that everyone here is behind doing that. It's been really fun to see him try and mold this program in this first 6 months that he's been here.
Yeah, and the talent acquisition is what I wonder about, because there are a couple of high-name, high-profile transfers that college football fans broadly are probably going to recognize. Mario Williams was a guy who was at USC. He was at Oklahoma before that. He's now down at Tulane. Ty Thompson was the highest-rated Oregon football quarterback recruit ever. More highly rated than Marcus Mariota, than Justin Herbert, than anybody. He's now down there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But go outside of just those 2 guys who people might be familiar with. When you look at the rest of the rosters in the American Athletic Conference, which is certainly capable of putting a team into the playoff, the betting favorite, according to our friends at FanDuel, is Ryan Silverfield and the Memphis program, who I think can have an exceptional season. Tulane is right there, number 2. Where do you feel like this Green Wave roster stacks up compared to the rest of the league?
I think that's a fair spot to put him right now. I think what has Memphis probably as the early betting favorite is they return Seth Hennigan as their quarterback. And you talk about maybe the most talented returning quarterback, certainly in the league, but one of the more talented returners in the nation. That's what Hennigan is with Memphis. But in terms of where Tulane stacks up, well, regardless of what Memphis might be brewing there, they've got a pretty strong core returning from last year's club, primarily on the defensive side of the ball. They do lose a lot of their secondary, but up the middle and the defensive line, they have maintained a lot of that from what was a high-level defense in last year's club. Offensively, there are a lot of changes that are likely going to be happening here. New quarterback, new wide receivers, because a lot of those guys left, and you mentioned one of them that's going to come in and do some replacing there in Mario Williams. Offensive line stays pretty well intact, and you got your tight ends that pretty well stay intact here as well. And you got one of the best running backs in the nation in Mekhi Hughes that returns. But still don't quite know who the signal caller is going to be. And until that question gets answered, that's the biggest thing right now for Tulane once they head into summer workouts right now. Camp in about 6 weeks is figuring out just what they have as QB1.
Let's talk about that quarterback battle before we get into the schedule side of things, which presents its own challenges. As they went through spring football, was there a leader? Is it Ty Thompson? Is it not Ty Thompson? How do you feel that quarterback battle is sitting as we sit here in the middle of June?
Right now, as I watched the spring practices, it really did feel like a 2-man race. Ty Thompson, brought in from Oregon, and Kai Horton, who has been the backup to Michael Pratt the last couple of years, has had to start some big profile games when Pratt was injured over the last couple of years. Most recently, it was the top 20 showdown with Ole Miss last year. He had to start that game, started a game at Southern Miss, had to lead some comebacks the year prior against Houston and whatnot. So he comes with with the experience that Ty Thompson does not have in terms of leading a Division I offense and leading it to pretty strong effectiveness. So Thompson comes in with probably more skill set with what he's capable of doing and what he can bring to an offense. Kai Horton brings the experience of being able to already do something like that. And so those two really split reps during the course of spring. Did either really step in front of the other? It seemed like one day maybe it was Thompson, the other day it was Horton. And so it really does feel like a two-man battle. I know Coach Sumrall is high on a redshirt freshman here in Darian Mensah as well, and what he was doing in the spring. But I do think it's between Thompson and Horton, and what that looks like on August 29th when this season kicks off. You know, I'm of the mindset, I've known Kai for a while. I know he'd be able to run an offense like this, and I think they're very comfortable if he's the guy. If you bring in a guy like Ty Thompson, if that's your choice in the portal like it was here for Jon Sumrall, you obviously see a lot of expectation about what he could bring to what you're trying to do. And so as I stand here talking to you right now, I would say that's probably the front runner in terms of being the starting quarterback. But I think if you ask anybody in those coaching offices here in New Orleans, they will tell you and say, honestly, it's between two guys, and they don't know as we sit here today.
It'll probably be the number one thing for Green Wave fans to look at throughout fall camp once that gets going in August. And then the schedule will get underway. And it's not exactly a cupcake first half for the Green Wave, Corey. You've got not just Kansas State at home week 2. You have Southeastern Louisiana week 1. That shouldn't be a problem. That game is on a Thursday, August 29th, same day that Colorado plays North Dakota State, which, you know, for the Buffs, do that at your own peril. Kansas State, then at Oklahoma, followed by at Louisiana, and hosting South Florida, who might have some sneaky expectations in the American Conference this year after their big bowl win last season. I feel like if Tulane gets through that stretch at 3-2, they're doing well. They're doing fine. But if they find a way, you'd probably look at that Kansas State game as the more likely of the two to pull an upset because it is at home. If they do that, Corey, I think that's an early season message to not just every other group of 5 team pushing for the playoff, but any other team. Because Kansas State's a contender in the Big 12, one of the 2 or 3 favorites over there. I think that'd be a heck of a statement. And the other teams that'll push for the G5 spot, Liberty maybe. You've got Memphis, of course, in the American, Boise State. I'll never rule out Fresno State. If they win that week 2 game against Kansas State, boy, that would send a lot of shockwaves throughout the college football world.
Yeah, the first half of this calendar for Tulane is going to be a rough one, and how they manage to get out of this. The second half on paper looks pretty kind, and so if they can come out of the first half of the season with a winning mark, and you mentioned the Kansas State, Oklahoma back-to-back, getting one of those games would be massive for this team. I'll add on, I'm glad you mentioned South Florida there as the conference opener. That's another team that I think has a legitimate shot to make a push in this league this year. UAB the week after that, right before an off week as well. UAB with Trent Dilfer in his second year. They've got a lot of returners. That could be a tricky trip as well right after the South Florida game. And so those first 6 weeks to me are going to tell the tale of this season, because after that, the opponents get a little bit kinder on paper. But if you can get a win over Kansas State at home, if you can certainly spring an upset in Oklahoma in week 3. That Louisiana trip is going to be a little gnarly here as well. That's a very good program out in Lafayette. And so the first half of this schedule is going to put Jon Sumrall right in the fire here. I'm sure they're okay with the fact that they have Southeastern Louisiana to open the year, try and get some things figured out in that first week. Ideally, if you can take care of business there before you really begin those next 4 or 5 weeks, that will really tell the tale of what your season's going to be.
And then you could set up, if things go according to plan, a regular season finale showdown with potentially an American Conference Championship game berth on the line. Playoff implications could very well be on the line against Memphis, having them at home on November 28th. That's a rather large game on paper, but a lot for the Green Wave to get through before that. And of course, they've got to figure out what their quarterback situation will be. Corey Gloor, the radio voice of the Green Wave. Corey, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you, Spencer. Roll Wave.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.